From the very first day of summer camp, from the very minute I stepped off that bus, this guy began trying to cultivate a special relationship with me. Primarily by constantly taking me aside and very confidentially feeding me some piece of racist and prurient misinformation, including the assertion that black people had larger sex organs than white people. I wasn't even entirely sure what a sexual organ actually was at the time. He said he had a photograph which proved it. Would I like to see it? And I said, okay, sure. And this is going to be hard for you to believe, but it's true. I fucking swear on the life of my mother. He showed me the photograph of the African man with the elephantitis of the testicles. And he told me all black men had balls this size. And for a number of years after that, I'd look, I'd try to check, which got me into a lot of trouble, staring at black men's crotches and wondering how they managed to somehow fit their colossal wheelbarrow-worthy balls into their pants, thinking perhaps it was somehow akin to the way a Rastafarian might fit his enormous trove of dreadlocks into his crocheted cap. And as soon as I got home from camp that particular summer, I immediately went over to my grandparents' house at 1904 Hudson Boulevard and immediately rushed over to the set of encyclopedias on the bookshelf, took down the E volume, flipping the pages in an agitated panic to the entry for elephantitis, because I'd completely convinced myself that this creepy counselor, whose name I've repressed, had somehow snuck into my grandparents' house, clipped out the photo of the guy with his balls in the wheelbarrow, and snuck it out again. A real-life version of someone creeping into a crypt, crapping and creeping out again. But of course the photo was still there. The page, at least, unmolested. When the imaginary intern said, "I'm worried about you," I felt like saying to him, "I'm worried about you." There were times, as I said, when he'd mumble ominous things to me and just sulk, He was kind of like a precocious child, but a child nonetheless. Well, let me put it this way. He was like a precocious child who had turned into a morbid adolescent. Well, a reclusive adolescent with morbid compulsions. It's almost impossible, obviously, to describe the imaginary intern without describing myself. One time he got this eerie look on his face as if he were holding a flashlight under his chin, and he said in this heavy Japanese accent, "I am the ghost of your dead sister." And then he switched to this sort of posh Indian accent. "You realize, don't you, that the only part of your life that the autobiography actually represents is the time that elapsed as you wrote it? The time with me. Your autobiography is actually a biography of me." Why do you think I'm obsessed with this idea of giving the world an alphabet soup enema? This was our code language for wanting to be a writer. After a very long Viennese pause, he said, "Why do you think you are?" And I said, "I don't know. Prolonged exposure to radiation from violent events in deep space?" When he'd say things to me like, "I'm the ghost of your dead sister," I didn't take it at all that seriously. I think he was just trying to seem more badass than he really was. I mean, it's more impressive, more exciting, cooler, I suppose, to say I'm the ghost of your dead sister than I'm an imaginary entity conjured up from cracks in the bathroom tile. You know what I mean? I get that. It did occur to me sometimes that he was less a co-producer, less a collaborator on the autobiography, and more a product or a byproduct of the autobiography. Almost like, and I'd never say this to him, almost like some sort of teratoma which flourishes in the favorable nutrient medium of childhood retrospection. Nonetheless, I hated seeing him sulk. Hated feeling that he was dissatisfied in any way. I said to him once, "You're an imaginary intern, You're not an imaginary indentured slave. You're free to leave whenever you like. I just want you to be happy." He let out a sigh and gazed down at the ground for a moment. "I am happy," he murmured. "I want you to know something," I said. "I love you. And I'm never going to lie about you or be ashamed of you or anything like that, okay?" As I've said before, the imaginary intern talked like a kid, so you had to wade through, just to give you a good example, all his diffident fumfering, he was like blah blah, and she was all like blah blah blah, all the whatevers and the my bads and the LOLs, before you realized that he was quoting from Mao's November 15, 1956 speech at the Second Plenum of the 8th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China about the suppression of counter-revolutionaries. This all came up because he'd said, relative to our idea of non-expository autobiography, that literary style anecdotes were like, quote, little Chiang Kai-sheks, end of quote, and needed to be, quote, executed, end of quote. And I said, what do you mean by that? And that's when he, in his diffident, fumfering way, quoted Mao. They, the counter-revolutionaries, ought to be executed. Some of the democratic personages say that it is bad to execute these people. We say that it is good to execute them. This is just a competing show. In this drama, we have always been singing in disharmony with the democratic personages. The ones we are executing are little Chiang Kai-sheks. If the counter-revolutionaries are not suppressed, the laboring people will not be happy. The oxen will not be happy either, nor will the plows, and the soil will not be comforted. This is because the laboring people who use the oxen, the plows, and the land are not happy. Therefore, we must execute some counter-revolutionaries. But this all had to be painstakingly gleaned through a translation process of which I was capable, given the propinquity of our thought processes. Mom, do you have any of that moisturizer with you, the stuff with the hyaluronic acid? Mark's mom rummages through her bag and retrieves a small bottle of moisturizing lotion. Mark gets down from the table and takes the bottle from her. Mark, thank you. He squeezes out a few daubs into the palm of his hand and gets back up on the table. Mark, to the fast food workers, you know, when Mao says laboring people, he means you guys. He massages the lotion into his wrinkled neck. Even in my most drunken, obstreperous state, when I'm like a thrashing, sweaty, demented infant, some frothing homunculus, one's impulse is to embrace me, to hold me in your arms, to stroke my little balding, translucent skull and console me. Poor Laner, poor Laner, as one might say to some homesick alien creature, or some morose ape in a tuxedo. I think I was in maybe 9th grade, 10th grade when I failed shop class after basically just taking a very large piece of wood and planing it down day after day until it was ultimately a very tiny piece of wood. I guess I made a toothpick. That ended up unintentionally being my final project. Other kids had made these great planters and bookends and stuff. I definitely do like cutting things into smaller and smaller pieces. Maybe it's a core aesthetic strategy of mine, come to think of it, to create a kind of plenitude, not by generating anything new, but by endlessly dividing what I originally had. Perhaps my revenge on the world is a small-statured male. I'm like 5'7"-ish, just to literally cut everything else down to size. The ant and the mouse, obvious personifications of my stature, have always been my totem animals. I still have an enduring identification with, I don't know what you'd call them. Maybe stigmatized animals, which is reflected in a lot of the poems I post on Twitter. E.g., still looking for homes for Muffin, a 7-foot adult tapeworm, Buster, a 10-month-old Ixodes tick, and Lulu, a 4-day-old Streptococcus bacterium. So anyway, to make up the credits I lost by failing shop, I took a summer class at a community college, which was fairly close to where we lived at the time in Maplewood, New Jersey. I think it was an intro to classical music survey type of thing, which seemed relatively painless. And the teacher, the professor, offered me a ride home one day, and on the way, he swung by his house and offered me a beer. I said fine and went in and sat on his couch in the living room, and he came on to me. And I said no thanks, and he told me that he'd fucked Leonard Bernstein, and that he could play me like a Stradivarius. I still think about this, and sort of wince actually, whenever I hear a piece of music that features pizzicato, that rapid plucking of the strings. Again, I said no thanks. And he was super cool about it. I bring this all up simply to point out that although I think now I have the face of an ogre, of some old Belgian morphine-dependent defrocked priest. I have no idea why I said Belgian just now. I was sort of cute back then. But God, how we change. We droop. We prolapse. We curdle and decay. We putrefy and deliquesce and melt into these foul, slimy puddles of ourselves. Unless we're somehow extracted from this evil world, somehow rescued from above.